What's this? A second video in only 2 weeks? Well, don't get used to it. I used some vacation time to work on other projects. But I had to take the opportunity to talk about a topic that I promise is more relevant than it sounds. Let me ask you this. If you're a woman, how many times on a dating app have you wondered why guys have profile pictures where they're holding up a fish or an animal they've just hunted? If you're a man, how many times have you heard women complaining about this? When women ask why men do this, the common response is usually something like, "It's to show he can be a provider," or something along those lines. There's a nugget of truth in this, but if that were the whole story, why wouldn't he show himself in a business suit, or at work, or fixing a car? Those are all ways of providing for a family. But the thing is, these aren't hobbies. You don't fix a car when it's not broken. That's not a hobby, that's a chore. You work to live, you don't live to work. And what you do with your time that you want to do says more about you than the things you have to do. Now, the real reason men put pics of themselves hunting and fishing is best summed up in this image from a woman's profile. Yes, and while this is only one example, it's a really common attitude women have towards video games. For every guy out there trying to show he has acceptable hobbies, with pictures of fish, there's a girl in a dating app listing video games as unacceptable hobbies. And it isn't just video games. It's anime, western cartoons, comic books, Warhammer 40k. It used to include superhero movies until those became more mainstream. If you ask a woman like this why she thinks video games are a red flag, she'll usually say something like, "It's a waste of time and money." And as a result, a lot of men try to show that they only have productive hobbies. This is especially common among conservative men and women, at least in America. You can still find a lot of women who lean to the left in America who hold this attitude, but the belief has its roots in the Protestant work ethic. That's really more the Calvinist work ethic. Martin Luther didn't come up with this. It's a byproduct of the Calvinist belief in predestination, the theory that God already knows who will get into heaven and who's going to hell. The Cliff Notes version is that Calvinists want to know that they're one of the ones God has chosen to go to heaven, and so they try to live in a way that they think guarantees their salvation. Somehow, they decided that the best way to do that was to suffer in this life, and they define suffering as working hard to acquire capital, and then refusing to spend that capital on pleasure. This is why Governor William Bradford in Plymouth confiscated children's Christmas presents in 1621 like a real-life Grinch, a far cry from Martin Luther, who invented the traditions of Christmas trees and holiday lights. What distinguishes the Protestant work ethic from things like charity or volunteering to help one's community was that the Calvinists made this lifestyle compulsory. Sure, on paper or in polite conversation, they might say that this sort of behavior was merely strongly encouraged. But as soon as someone resisted, the mask would slip right off. This was because the Puritans believed that if, and only if, everyone in the new colonies and eventually the new nation of America would follow the Protestant work ethic, then God would bless America and protect it from the things that have caused other empires and nations to collapse in the past. The original idea of American exceptionalism. But while it started among Calvinists, the idea that suffering earned you a place in heaven managed to spread to other branches of Christianity. Not so much the Jews. They've done a pretty good job rejecting this nonsense. Maybe it's because King David was always singing and dancing in the streets of Jerusalem well into his twilight years. His wife was always complaining that he was keeping the neighbors up at night. All the Jewish creatives in American history might have been following his example. But as it turned out, a lot of religious leaders and political rulers really liked the idea of the layperson working really hard expecting no reward, even if Jesus never commanded anything like that in the Bible. Fundamentally, the Protestant work ethic wasn't all that new. Rulers have always wanted people to work like slaves for no reward. The only novelty to the Protestant version was that now the slaves could become their own slave drivers, and neither the nobility nor the religious leaders of the day could resist something like that. Even Catholics weren't immune, and people as close to the Vatican as Italy would pick up on this mindset, even before the Puritans tried to build colonies in America. This would ultimately clash with the Renaissance movement, which was already a point of conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants. While Lutherans fought with logic and the actual text of the Bible, and Calvinists fought with ideas that they just made up, the main weapon Catholics used in religious conflicts was art. On the surface, the Pope and many high-ranking members of the priesthood wanted Renaissance artists to keep producing religious works of art, particularly ones that related to scenes from the Bible. But what about works of art that weren't religious? A brilliant sculptor like Michelangelo creates something like David, or The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, but what about the Mona Lisa? Where does something like that fit in with this new idea of suffering your way into heaven? When da Vinci made artworks that weren't religious in nature, he would often get complaints from cynics claiming that the paintings were useless. In one of his notebooks, Da Vinci responded like this: "Often, when I see these men take this work in his hand, I wonder that he does not put it to his nose like a monkey, or ask me if it is something good to eat." Somewhere, in the process of trying to ban all pleasure, the people following the Protestant work ethic have become Da Vinci's monkey. They have abandoned one of the core things that makes us human, something that separates us from the animals. And I believe this is the dominant reason why conservative entertainment, at least in America, always seems to be terrible. In my last video, I talked about how conservative media tends to lack creativity and is often incredibly boring. And now, I'm convinced that most of that is due to the Protestant work ethic. While other religions and political movements have adopted the Calvinist view of suffering and used it to their own ends, conservatives in America have it written into their ancestral history. For other people, the demand for suffering is like a twig on a branch. For conservative Americans, it's a root. And while many people misuse the term Protestant work ethic to mean things it was never supposed to mean, there are a lot of conservatives out there who know full well what it is and are even proud of it. It never seems to matter to these people that Jesus liked to party in the Bible, or that one of his first miracles was turning water into wine. This idea is part of the reason why American public schools are so terrible. Yes, a big part of it is due to the Prussian model of trying to produce competent factory workers, and it is true that big businesses and politicians who designed the public school model were more interested in making diligent workers than free thinkers, especially free thinkers who could start their own businesses that could compete with the establishment. But do you know what happens when you add the Protestant work ethic? You basically get the Prussian model on steroids. Ever notice how a lot of attempts at either Christian or conservative media tends to be edutainment? You know, the kind that completely forgot the entertainment part? The response creators of such works as Bible Man, Gaither's Pond, or Bibletown have when people complain about their shows being boring is usually, "That's just the liberals review bombing us." Oh wait, that's their other reaction to criticism. The one we're interested in is, well, it's supposed to be educational. It's supposed to teach kids about God, or at least the version we believe in that isn't supported by the Bible, and we sure as heck aren't going to crack that open. Entertainment is secondary. Yeah, be careful taste testing those paintings, guys. Some of them are made with lead paint.
Stupid monkey.
Incidentally, do you know where we get the word scholar? It comes from an old word for leisure. When we say someone is a gentleman and a scholar, it means that they have enough time and money that they can study things that are not relevant to their immediate survival. Animals don't do this. Monkeys don't do this. Only humans do this. Only humans spend time learning things purely because we can, because we enjoy it. And people, especially children, enjoy learning when it's on their own terms. Don't believe me? 3 words: scholastic book fair. There is nothing scholarly about education in America anymore. This is a bit of a side tangent, but it is related to what Da Vinci was talking about, and, I think, what he was warning us about. Schools aren't the least bit interested in teaching things in a way that's fun or enjoyable. They have the stick. They can force students to study, at least for the most part. They don't have to make sure kids actually comprehend or really learn anything. It's why they never seem to have a good answer when kids ask, "When are we ever going to use this?" I used to be a substitute teacher, back when I was gathering money to cover for law school. While I was there, whenever I had a subject I needed to explain to kids, especially if it involved math, I would try to give them examples from Minecraft. If Steve wants to build a wall around his house, his farm, and his animal pens to keep out creepers and zombies, and the area he wants to protect is 50 blocks wide and 60 blocks long, and he wants it to be 3 blocks high to prevent skeletons from shooting over it, how many blocks of cobblestone does he need to gather? If a single inventory space can only hold 64 blocks, how many inventory spaces will he need to gather the cobblestone? I never had a single kid ask me when they were going to use this when I taught math this way. Some of them were going to use it the very same day when they got home. But that isn't how school is designed these days, and it usually isn't how conservatives in America try to make entertainment. Another way of thinking about art might be a form of mental exercise. Just as physical exercise is good for the body, mental exercise is good for the mind. But picking up rocks to work at building a wall, well, any physical trainer will tell you that's not a good way to improve your health. Any improvement in your health will be purely a byproduct, not a direct outcome. The same applies to art. Art can be used to hone one's mind as much as exercise can improve the body. And I'm not just talking about knowledge or facts. You can get facts from a dry, boring textbook. I'm talking about things like wisdom, empathy, or the ability to recognize threats. And remember that as humans, there is only one animal that ever preys on us: other humans. And when I say that you can learn wisdom from art, I don't just mean that we can set up a story where there's some moral about wisdom at the end. I mean you can learn what makes you as a human being happy, What do you enjoy? What do others who appreciate the same art enjoy? And what can you do to truly be a healthy and helpful human being? Art can teach us to question whether the person who's ordering us to work hard expecting no benefit is actually doing the same thing, or if he's just spending his own capital on pleasure in secret. There's a very real chance that your local pastor is just a parasite feeding off of other people's goodwill. Art can show us that just because we work hard at something, that doesn't mean it's actually making things better. Earning a lot of money and then giving it all to a drug addict, who then spends it on more drugs, would technically fit the rules of the Protestant work ethic. You made capital, and you didn't spend it on your own pleasure. You even gave it to a poor person. But did you make anything better? And there's the much grander, empathetic lesson in art. What do other people like to read, watch, or play? There's something refreshingly capitalistic about good art, especially art that rejects a lot of American conservatism. The only books, shows, video games, movies, or songs that succeed are the ones that people actually want to consume. That means if you truly want to succeed as an artist, or at least be able to pay the rent, you have to make things that people actually like. The entertainment can't be an afterthought. You don't have the stick that school uses to force kids to pay attention. You actually have to be entertaining. And one final point I want to make is that all media for art are valid. There are some that work better for certain things. Books work well for making people think. Comics, cartoons, and anime can show you visual beauty and teach you to examine for things that aren't always spelled out for you. Where in the world the story came from doesn't matter that much. Sure, Japan has a different view of the world than Americans do. Sometimes that's a good thing. Being humble enough to recognize that you aren't always right can open you up to a whole world of new experiences. But the thing conservatives in America have tried their hardest to get rid of has always been video games. To the untrained eye, video games are purely for pleasure, and the entire industry spits in the face of the Protestant work ethic. There have been times that Christians have tried to make their own, because if you can't beat them, join them, etc. But they were all terrible. So, instead, they've buckled down, trying to at first start with much more reasonable accusations that violent video games are bad for children, and then moving up to the much less defensible movements to restrict things like Tetris or Pokemon games. Mind you, this has been going on for a lot longer than microtransactions in Fortnite. These aren't just parents upset about in-game gambling, or games that were designed to be addictive marketed towards children. This was as far back as 1982, wherein the Surgeon General, Dr. C. Koop, declared video games to be a public health hazard because young people were, and I am quoting, becoming addicted to the machines, body and soul.
You stupid monkey!
The thing is, video games in some ways have more to teach us than any other media, because of their interactivity. We can try, over and over, to find the things we need to get that golden ending. We can ask ourselves every time a Dark Souls boss slams us against a wall and makes us drop all our souls if it's really worth continuing to fight, and if so, why? But the video game that really made me want to do this video was none other than Spiritfarer. For those of you who haven't played it, Spiritfarer is about a girl named Stella who has taken over as the new ferryman of the dead, bringing them to their final destination, when they are ready to move on through the Everdoor. But before you can do this, you have to get to know these people, understand their stories, recognize how they died, and why they lived the ways that they did. Your job as ferrymen is not to force them through the final door. You have to help them get ready to go on their own terms. Most people who've played Spiritfarer will bring up Alice, a hedgehog with Alzheimer's disease. This is the one that made most people cry. Maybe I'm too cold-hearted, or maybe I've already gone through this too many times with my own relatives who lived to be over 100 years old, but for me, Alice wasn't the one that hit me in the gut. No, the pair of spirits who've lived rent-free in my head since playing this game were Bruce and Mickey, two brothers who used to be part of the Mafia. They are, quite possibly, the most unpleasant people you will ever ferry on your ship. Only the annoying school marm comes close to competition, but those two Mafia goons demand that you build them a fancy house, fill it with expensive yet tacky stuff, and are ultimately rude to both you and the other spirits. Bruce, the hummingbird, does all the talking. Mickey, the water buffalo, just sits there like he's not even paying attention. And then, at the end of their storyline, Bruce drops his guard and tells you the truth. Mickey isn't even really there. When they were alive, Mickey ended up in a coma and was effectively dead in intensive care long before he actually died. The Mickey you've been with is just a creation of his brother's memories, and the water buffalo acts like he isn't all there because that's what Mickey was like after he went into a coma. Bruce admits that he and his brother were not good men. They lived violent lives, hurt lots of people, and always felt like they had no choice due to their upbringing. Only now that it's too late does Bruce wonder if they could have done things differently. And then the final bomb comes when Bruce tells you that when Mickey finally died, not just his mind in a coma, but when his body gave out as well, Bruce ended his own life. Because as terrible as the two had been, he couldn't stand the thought of having to go through life without his brother. As you traveled with these obnoxious crooks on your ship, did you try to keep them happy? Did you get frustrated when they made the other spirits uncomfortable? Did you bother making them their favorite meals, or just give them whatever you had on hand? You can't get this experience from a classroom, or a Bluey knockoff. I would argue it's hard to recreate the same experience with a book. Now, some people can never be convinced that video games are art, or that art is important in the first place. They usually fall into one of three categories. People who aren't wise enough to understand the value and intricacies of wisdom, people who don't see how you acquiring wisdom is beneficial to them, and, unfortunately, there is a third group who don't want you developing wisdom because it makes it harder for them to exploit you. Sadly, the more I look into this problem, the more common that last one seems to be in modern society. Fun fact, pastors don't like it when you use the Bible to point out how they're acting like the hypocrites that Jesus warned about. But the best response to all three of these types of people is to simply ignore them. They aren't worth your time. And if you're a guy who's watching this, and you're thinking about putting a photo of yourself holding up a fish in a dating app profile, just remember, the girl who thinks video games are a red flag isn't worth trying to impress. There's a pretty good chance you're a bit more evolved than her.